I never thought changing my Wi-Fi password would land me in this situation. One minute I was fixing a slow connection, the next Ella Thomas, the HOA president, was standing on my porch screaming that I'd shut down the entire neighborhood security system. Before I could explain, she called the cops, accusing me of cyber tampering. I tried to laugh it off, but then the flashing red lights of a squad car reflected off my window. What happened next shocked even the officers who showed up. Turns out this wasn't just about Wi-Fi, it was about something much bigger. Something that would make the whole neighborhood question everything they thought they knew about Ella. Ella Thomas wasn't your average HOA president. To the people of Lakeside Grove, she was more like a local dictator, wielding power with a clipboard in one hand and a rule book in the other. She was in her mid-50 seconds, always impeccably dressed in her signature pink blazer, striding down the streets like she owned them. Her presence was a constant reminder that in this neighborhood, she was the law. If your grass was an inch too long, she'd measure it. If your trash cans weren't lined up just right, expect a warning letter. If you dared defy her, she'd send you fines with a smile that could freeze water. I learned early on that Ella wasn't someone you crossed. She controlled everything from the mailbox placement to the community pool rules. Most neighbors tried to stay in her good graces, afraid of her wrath. I, on the other hand, figured I could fly under the radar. I wasn't looking for trouble, just a quiet life. But that illusion shattered the moment I changed my Wi-Fi password. To Ella, it wasn't just a small technical adjustment. It was a threat to her reign. Without warning, she stormed onto my porch, her eyes blazing, and accused me of sabotaging the entire neighborhood's security system. I had no idea it would escalate into a full-blown scandal, but Ella had already decided I was her next target. It started with small annoyances. At first, Ella kept her distance, but then she began popping up more often, clipboard in hand, always acting like she was inspecting something. One day, as I pulled into my driveway, she was standing by my mailbox. I had just gotten home from a long day at work, but there she was, measuring the distance between my flag and the top of the post. "This flag isn't up to code," she said, not even looking up at me. "It should be red, not this faded blue. I'll be sending you a notice." I blinked, feeling the irritation building in my chest. I didn't even respond. Let her send the notice, I thought. I wasn't going to fight over a flag. The next week, she sent a letter saying my solar panels weren't approved by the HOA. I knew that was nonsense. The panels were state-subsidized and fully legal, but I still wrote her a polite letter explaining it and providing the necessary paperwork. She didn't respond to that, which I considered a small victory. But the truth was, this was more than just about codes and rules. It was about control. And Ella wasn't going to stop until she had it. But I didn't think much about it. It wasn't the first time I had to deal with a petty authority figure, and I figured if I kept to myself, she'd eventually lose interest. That was my mistake. A few days later, my internet went haywire. My Wi-Fi connection dropped constantly. At first, I blamed my internet provider, but after running some diagnostics, I saw something strange. A device labeled Lakeside HOA Network kept connecting to my router. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't recognize it, and I certainly hadn't authorized any device to use my Wi-Fi. I checked the router logs. Hundreds of megabytes were being transferred, daily data was flowing through my network without my consent. Someone was using my internet, and I had no idea who or why. It felt like an invasion of my privacy, but I didn't have proof yet. So I changed my Wi-Fi password. Simple fix, right? A small joke, I even renamed it to something ridiculous, like "No More Free Wi-Fi," just to have a laugh. But the very next morning, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Ella standing there, her face red with rage. Her usual calm, controlled demeanor was gone. She was frantic, pointing at my house like it was the source of all evil. "What did you do to the community network?" she snapped. I blinked, still groggy from my coffee. "What are you talking about?" She jabbed a finger toward my house. "The cameras. The HOA cameras stopped working this morning. We lost access to the neighborhood feed right after you tampered with your router." I stood frozen, trying to process what she was saying. "My router, I changed my password because someone was using my internet." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't get it. The cameras are part of the HOA's security system. Your router was a key part of the entire setup. Now you've disabled our system." I frowned. "Ella, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't agree to share my Wi-Fi for cameras." She didn't care. "It's in the bylaws," she said, flipping through her binder, as if it were the holy text. Section 14B, Cooperative Infrastructure Maintenance. You're supposed to contribute to the community's security. My jaw dropped. "Wait, cooperative? What? You never told me that," she scowled. "That's because you're too busy hiding behind your computer screen to pay attention to the rules. I crossed my arms. Look, I'm not sharing my Wi-Fi with the HOA. I changed my password because someone was freeloading off my connection, she sneered. If you don't reconnect the network right now, I'll call the police. I couldn't help but laugh. You're going to call 911 because I changed my password? Yes, she hissed. This is a cyber attack. You've disrupted the entire neighborhood's security system. And with that, she whipped out her phone, dialed 911, and began screaming into it. I need immediate assistance. My neighbor is tampering with our community network and endangering the security of the entire neighborhood. I stood there barely able to hold back my laughter. But when the sirens began wailing in the distance, the absurdity of the situation hit me. Ella wasn't joking. She was dead serious about calling the police over something as ridiculous as a password change. Within minutes, a police SUV rolled up in front of my house, followed by 2 officers. One was older and had the expression of someone who had seen too many HOA-related calls. The other was younger, clearly just starting out in the force and looking completely lost. "Afternoon, sir," the older officer said, scanning the scene. "We got a call about Wi-Fi." Ella immediately stormed forward. "Yes, officer." He disabled the cameras. "The HOA cameras are part of our security grid, and now they don't work." I stepped forward, not even trying to hide my confusion. "That's because I changed my password. Someone was using my Wi-Fi without permission." Ella's face turned crimson. "That's a lie. You're sabotaging our community's security." I glanced at the officers. "You're welcome to come inside and check the router." They followed me into the house, the younger officer shaking his head, obviously not knowing what to make of the situation. We walked into my office, where the router sat on the desk, blinking innocently. The older officer bent over looking at the device list on my router. His eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered under his breath. "There's an active connection here from a network labeled Lakeside HOA Main Cam Server." I froze. "What?" The younger officer leaned in. "Looks like someone's still trying to connect to your network from the HOA clubhouse." The older officer looked up at me. "Mind if we check the logs?" I nodded. "Go ahead. Check everything." As they dug into the logs, it became clear someone in the HOA had been accessing my network, and not just for a couple of hours, they'd been using it for months. The officers exchanged a look. This was no longer a simple Wi-Fi issue. It was something much more troubling. As the investigation continued, the officers were able to confirm that the HOA had been using my internet to power their surveillance system. They asked me to come down to the HOA office, and I agreed. Ella, meanwhile, stood outside, ranting to anyone who would listen, but I didn't care anymore. I knew I had nothing to hide. What I didn't know was how deep this went. When we arrived at the HOA office, Ella was already there, trying to regain some sense of control. But as the officers examined the network setup, they found something unexpected. The HOA's surveillance feeds were still active, but now they were coming from my network. Ella's face went white as the officers began to piece together the extent of her manipulation. "You've been spying on the entire neighborhood, haven't you?" I asked, my voice cold. She didn't respond, but the look on her face said everything. The officers told her they had probable cause to search the HOA clubhouse and seize any relevant equipment. Ella's control was slipping, and she knew it. The moment they stepped into the clubhouse, they found it rows of monitors and servers, live feeds from the entire neighborhood, all secretly routed through my Wi-Fi. I stared in disbelief at the footage showing my own backyard zoomed in on my patio. Ella's defenses crumbled. You've got no right to do this," she protested, but the officers ignored her. They were too busy seizing hard drives and documenting everything. It was over. Ella's reign of control was coming to an end, and everyone in Lakeside Grove was about to find out just how far she'd gone to maintain it. By the time we arrived at the HOA office, the neighborhood was buzzing with the kind of tension only a scandal of this magnitude could bring. Neighbors had gathered on their lawns, whispering, pointing some filming on their phones. Ella was still outside, waving her binder like it was a royal decree. She was pacing, shouting about community sovereignty and unlawful interference. The officers approached her slowly, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. She knew the game was over, but she wasn't going to give up easily. "Officers, you don't understand," she called out, her voice cracking. "This man is a danger to us all." Sergeant Reeves, the older officer, didn't even flinch. He raised his hand and said firmly, "Ma'am, we've heard enough. We're just here to look at the network setup. Please step aside." Ella hesitated, but when she saw the determined look on Reeves's face, she backed down, muttering under her breath. "This is harassment," she hissed, but no one was listening anymore. The younger officer, Lewis, turned to me and asked, "Do you mind showing us the router?" I led them inside where my router sat quietly on the desk, blinking innocently. As the officers checked the logs, their faces went from puzzled to stunned. The older officer spoke up, his voice calm but serious. "We've got unauthorized access here. Looks like someone from the HOA clubhouse is still trying to tap into your network." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "So, they've been using my internet to spy on the neighborhood. That's exactly what it looks like," the officer confirmed. Outside, Ella was still ranting to the gathered crowd, trying to spin the situation in her favor. But as the officers examined the equipment, it became clear that her claims of neighborhood safety were nothing more than a cover-up for her obsessive need to control everyone. The officers asked me to step aside so they could inspect everything, and it didn't take long before they found the most damning evidence. "Look at this," the older officer said, pointing to a screen. "You've got a log here showing a connection attempt from an IP address labeled Lakeside HOA main cam server. It's still trying to access your network." I swallowed hard, realizing the full scale of Ella's operation. She wasn't just using my Wi-Fi to spy on a few houses. She had been feeding footage from every corner of Lakeside Grove into her personal cloud. The feeds weren't just limited to the exterior of people's homes. They were accessing private spaces, bedrooms, and living rooms. I turned to Ella, who had finally stopped pacing, her face drained of color. "So this is what it's been about all along," I said quietly. "Not safety, not security, just control." She opened her mouth to argue, but there was nothing left to say. The evidence was irrefutable. The officers, now fully aware of the extent of Ella's actions, moved to seize all the equipment. They began unplugging servers, tagging hard drives, and photographing monitors. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction as I watched Ella's carefully constructed empire crumble before her eyes. But she wasn't done yet. As the officers continued their work, Ella shot me one last venomous look. "You think this is the end, Paul?" she sneered. "You've ruined everything. The community will turn on you next." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The officers exchanged looks, and Sergeant Reeves stepped forward, his voice final. "You're not above the law, Mrs. Thomas. You violated privacy laws, manipulated your position for personal gain, and caused a massive breach of trust." Ella's face twisted in frustration, but the mask of control was slipping. She tried one last-ditch effort to regain some power. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll make sure the community knows what you've done to me." But no one was listening to her anymore. As the officers led her away in handcuffs, the crowd outside erupted into whispers. Some were filming, others were simply standing in stunned silence. Ella, the woman who had once controlled every aspect of their lives, was finally exposed for who she really was. As they placed her in the squad car, I stood there watching the car drive away, and for the first time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Ella had used her power to manipulate and control, but in the end, she had underestimated one thing: the truth. The flashing lights of the police car faded into the distance, but the truth, I realized, would stay, and it would protect everyone from ever being watched again. As the dust began to settle, Lakeside Grove slowly started to feel like a neighborhood again. The police cars had left, and the media crews who had swarmed the area like vultures were packing up their equipment. Neighbors lingered on their lawns, exchanging glances, some shaking their heads, others visibly relieved. The tension that had once gripped the community was finally starting to fade. I stood in front of my house, still trying to process what had just happened. The whole ordeal felt surreal, like a strange dream I couldn't wake up from. I glanced across the street where Mark, the retired teacher, was watering his plants. He caught my eye and waved. For the first time since I'd moved here, it felt like a genuine gesture of friendliness, not forced politeness to avoid confrontation. Janet, the neighborhood vlogger, approached me with her phone in hand, but this time there were no cameras or gossip. She handed me a small box of homemade cookies. "Hey, Paul," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "Just wanted to say thanks. You've done what none of us had the courage to do." I took the box, a little taken aback. "You're welcome, Janet." It wasn't easy, but it needed to be done. A few others joined in, nodding their approval. Even Mark, the guy who had been fined for planting tomatoes a few months ago, came over to offer his thanks. "You saved us all," he said, shaking my hand. I didn't know how far Ella was willing to go until now. I smiled, but didn't know what to say. For the first time in months, I felt like I belonged. The threat of surveillance was gone, and with it, the paranoia that had once loomed over every decision. We were free. But even as the community began to heal, the emotional toll of what we had all experienced wasn't easy to shake. Neighbors were still processing the violation of their privacy, the fact that they had been watched sometimes for months without their consent. The revelation that Ella had used my Wi-Fi as a cover to spy on us all was a bitter pill to swallow. But in a strange way, it also brought everyone closer together. A few days later, I received an official letter from the county court. The HOA was facing a class action lawsuit from multiple residents, including me. The charges were extensive: unauthorized surveillance, privacy violations, and data theft. Ella had crossed the line in so many ways that it was hard to keep track of them all. The legal ramifications were just beginning. As for Ella, her conviction wasn't the end of the story. After the police uncovered her surveillance network, it didn't take long for the county to take further action. She was sentenced to 18 months of probation and banned from ever serving on any HOA board again. But the emotional damage she had inflicted on the residents of Lakeside Grove couldn't be undone by a sentence or fine. Agent Rowe, the cybercrime investigator who had helped uncover the full extent of Ella's operation, called me a week after the trial. "Just wanted to let you know," he said, his tone serious, "that the lawsuit is moving forward, and the HOA will be required to pay restitution to those whose privacy was violated." I nodded, absorbing the information. The legal battle was far from over, but I had to admit the sense of justice was starting to feel real. The aftermath of the trial was quieter than I expected. The media frenzy had died down, and Lakeside Grove slowly returned to its rhythm. The HOA office was shut down by county order, the cameras removed, and the servers that Ella had used for surveillance were seized as evidence. Tom Garcia, the newly appointed HOA vice president, came to my door one afternoon with a thick envelope in his hand. "Paul, I just wanted to thank you for everything you did. It wasn't easy, and I know you didn't ask for this, but because of you, we're restructuring the entire HOA. We want to rebuild on a foundation of transparency and respect." I raised an eyebrow. "So, you want me to be part of it?" He handed me the envelope. "We'd like you to serve as the permanent technology advisor to help guide us through setting up a legal and secure system. You've earned it." I took the envelope, my mind racing. A part of me wanted to say no after everything that had happened. I didn't know if I was ready to jump back into HOA politics. But then I thought about it. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. The board was finally admitting their mistakes, and maybe this was my chance to help create a community that wasn't run by fear and control. "All right," I said, finally breaking my silence. "But we need to start fresh. No more shared networks. No more hidden agendas." Tom smiled. "Agreed." A few days later, I attended my first official HOA meeting as the new technology advisor. It was a strange experience, walking into the same room where I had once feared Ella's wrath. But now, the mood was different. The room was quieter, humbler. Tom was standing at the front, visibly nervous. "All right, everyone," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge Paul King for everything he's done. He's made it possible for us to finally rebuild." Applause erupted from the crowd, genuine applause. It wasn't forced. For the first time in years, Lakeside Grove was actually working together. We spent the next hour reviewing the bylaws, breaking down the old policies, and brainstorming new ones based on transparency. People were talking freely, offering suggestions and asking questions. There was a sense of unity in the room, something I had never expected to feel in an HOA meeting. By the end of the meeting, it felt like the weight of Ella's influence had finally lifted. The board had voted to rewrite the bylaws, ensuring that every new project would have to be approved by the community. No more secret surveillance. No more control disguised as safety. As I left the meeting, the night air felt different, calmer, more peaceful. The streetlights glowed warmly, and for the first time since I'd moved to Lakeside Grove, I felt like I had truly found a place I could call home. I walked past the clubhouse, its windows dark, its servers gone. For once, there were no cameras watching, just peace. As I sat on my porch that night, I thought about how something so small, a simple Wi-Fi password, had unraveled an entire system of control. But in the end, it wasn't about the password. It was about standing up for what was right, protecting our privacy, and ensuring that the truth would always find its way to the surface. I smiled as I checked my Wi-Fi one last time. HOA spy-free zone flashed on the screen, secure and connected. This time, it felt real. The truth had won.